Hello, everybody. I'm Craig Budner. I'm with one of my favorite people on the planet, Nichols, who I've had the pleasure of being a partner with. I've had the pleasure of being his lawyer, helping him. So he's been my client. I've had the pleasure of learning from him through the years and how he's dealt with a variety of crises. And I think this is going to be a fascinating conversation for people to learn from. Rich has such a wealth of experience in some areas that most lawyers never get to do. So, Rick, thanks for being willing to do this.
This is kind of a treat. Thanks for having me.
So here you are. You've got degrees from Hastings, Stanford, and Dartmouth, but the beginning of your life wasn't exactly silver spoon-like. Can you tell us a little bit about how you grew up and any memorable experiences that would give people a flavor for kind of where you came from?
I grew up in the no spoon world. I grew up in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Poor, no question about that. My mom worked in a factory for 40 years during the time when we had television tubes, and her job was to put the cardboard cover on the back of the television tube. She did that for 40 years. My dad was he worked in a factory for 18 years and came home one day, he quit. He said he couldn't take it anymore, and he ended up spending the rest of his life as a bartender and a cook. He learned how to cook in the Air Force, and that's where he met my mom. To be sitting here today at age 65, after a 35-year career in the law, if you had told me that when I was 10, I would have laughed at you. I wouldn't have even known what a lawyer was. I'd never met a lawyer. 2, wouldn't have thought I'd be alive past the age of 20 to be even able to take advantage of some of this stuff. Because a lot of the kids I grew up with left this earth at a very young age.
You know, I remember a story that you shared with me about being a little kid in your teenage years, I believe, and kind of peering out the window and seeing a scene that, you know, we may see in movies, but none of us really get to see in live. Can you share that story?
That was back in 1970, at the height of race relations issues here in the United States. And in my neighborhood, it was a poor black neighborhood. And the Black Panther Party had come down from Boston and had kind of taken over our neighborhood. A couple of weeks prior to them coming to town, one of my friends was shot and killed at what was known as the club. It was a hangout for teenage kids. One evening in July, a 57 Ford with 4 white kids in it rolled up very slowly to the club. The driver got out, put a sawed-off shotgun over the top of the roof and fired indiscriminately into the crowd, killing a friend of mine, Lester Lima, and wounding 3 or 4 other people. I was at home at the time, and you could see, it was Kempton Street. You could see Kempton Street from my kitchen window, and I could see and hear the screaming and the yelling, and that was basically the beginning of 2 weeks of riots in my neighborhood. The neighborhood was burned down and burned out. The place where my dad worked, he was a bartender at a tavern. The tavern was burned out. The Black Panther Party came into town and took over the grocery store that was attached to the tavern, and this grocery store actually kept a lot of us in the neighborhood fed. That's where we got our food on credit. I would often walk down to the store. It was owned by two brothers, John and Phil Boncini. I would go down to the store and buy certain items that my mother wanted me to pick up to bring home, and never had any money, and we paid on cash. They kept a little black, I can still see it in my mind, a black leather ledger, and they had your name in it, and they would write down how much you spent that day, and you paid when you could pay. Well, the riots ended up burning out that store, and the Black Panther Party took over that storefront and basically said they were going to take over the neighborhood. And a couple of weeks later, at about 6 a.m, my mom woke me up before she went to work. We lived across the street in a tenement, across from what was now a burned-out car dealership. And she woke me up and she said, "Richie, the state police are here and come look and come see." And I looked out the window and a phalanx of 40 state police cars with 40 state troopers, 4 in a car, rolled in formation, got out of their cars, had those bandolero bullet things that were across their chest, and basically got into formation and walked around the corner and stormed the Black Panther headquarters. And I can still hear them saying, it was like something you see in a Western. You know, we're going to give you count to 10, come out with your hands up kind of a thing. And they caught the Black Panthers by surprise, took them over, and basically took over our neighborhood. And that was sort of like the essence of what I grew up in. I mean, that day we were kicked out of our homes. It was like a police state. The police searched our houses without any warrants, without anything. We didn't even know if we were going to be able to get back into our apartment. That's the kind of stuff that I grew up in and never thought I'd get out. That was in my beginning of my junior year in high school, and I ran track, and I thought that might be my way out. Ultimately, it kind of was. But it was a tough situation to grow up in. I'll never forget it. And I consider myself lucky to be alive and see if you be able to tell the story.
That's
45,
incredible.
50 years later.
It's an incredible, I've kind of chills hearing that, and during a pandemic, we think we're experiencing pretty unique situations, but wow, that's a whole different world of exposure to the frailties of human relations. Thanks for sharing that. You end up at the greatest college on the planet from there somehow.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. We share an alma mater, Dartmouth College, and talk a little bit about how did you get the opportunity to go to Dartmouth, and a little bit of what you learned while you were there.
In the mind's eye of my track coach in high school, Richard Pont, Dick Pont. He's still alive. He's still there. And he saw potential in me. He thought I was a smart kid. Did well in high school. I was top of my class. But I had no idea about the Ivy Leagues. I knew what Harvard was because it was 50 miles up the road in Boston, in Cambridge, but I had no idea about the Ivy League. Had never heard of Dartmouth, anything. In my sophomore year, I started getting handwritten letters from the track coach at Dartmouth. Handwritten, Ken Weinbell, track coach. And I'd get the letters, and I was very fascinated with the fact that this guy took the time to sit down and write me handwritten letters. And I was kind of enamored with that. And because I was getting recruiting letters from all the big schools, University of Tennessee, University of Nebraska, Villanova, Boston College, they all wanted me to come and run track for them. But I was fascinated with these handwritten letters. And I took them to my coach. And he said, well, Dartmouth is a great place. It's in the Ivy League. And I said, well, where is it? So it's up in New Hampshire. New Hampshire. Isn't it cold up there? Yeah, it's cold up there, but it's a great place. I said, well, I guess I'll apply. So I went to my guidance counselor, and I said, I want to apply to Dartmouth. And she looked at me, and she said, you never get in. Forget that. You should go to Teachers College, Bridgewater State College. That's where you need to go. And I'm not even going to help you with your application. And she was serious. So I went back to my coach, and I said, hey, she said she won't help me with the application. He said, I'll find you a guidance counselor that will. So I had Mrs. Mahoney help me with my application. I had no idea what I was doing. And I had to do this personal statement. What's that? So I just wrote about my life and sent the application in, and I got in. And so I got the acceptance letter, and I went to my coach and I said, hey, I got in, but I don't know anything about this place. But I've also gotten scholarship offers from University of Nebraska, Villanova to run track. I'm going to go to one of those places. One day he called me in. It was a Monday afternoon before practice. He called me and he told me to sit down. He was kind of a tough guy. So I sat down. He said, look, he said, you are a good athlete, but you're not great. I thought I was great. You're not great. And if you go to one of these big schools, Tennessee, Nebraska, Villanova, track factories, you're going to get lost in the shuffle because you don't have the kind of talent to be competitive at that level. So now I'm pissed off. What do you mean I have that kind of talent? I know I'm good. I know I'm great. I'll be fine. And he said, no, you won't. He said, you'll be lucky to make the traveling team, period. And I know you want to go to the NCAAs. I know you have visions of being an NCAA champion. You're not even going to make it, period. But if you go to Dartmouth, you'll be a big athlete in a small athletic pond. You will be the best. It's Division I. You'll get to compete against the best, and you will get to the NCAA championships. But more importantly, you're going to get a great education. You won't be on athletic scholarship. So if you decide you don't want to run track anymore, you can quit and pursue your studies. And at the end of the day, you're going to have a degree from an Ivy League institution, and that's going to set you up for life. So I listened to that, and I talked to a few other people, and I decided, okay, I'm going to go. So I went to Dartmouth, sight unseen, had no idea where it was. They had a program called the Bridge Program, which was for kids from the inner city, I was from the inner city, who had no idea where they were going. And you could spend the summer at Dartmouth to get oriented to the classwork and to get oriented into this, pretty staid community in Hanover, New Hampshire. So I went. I graduated on June 13th, and I was at Dartmouth the next day. And my parents drove me up there. They'd never been out of Massachusetts driving. I'll never forget. They dropped me off at the back of Cutter Hall, which was the African American Society dorm, and they just waved goodbye. That was it. I was there, and at Dartmouth, had no idea what I was in for, but I did adapt pretty quickly, and it turned out to be like one of the best experiences of my life. But that's how I ended up at Dartmouth. Yeah.
That's awesome. Tell our listeners, what track events did you excel in?
I was a great indoor runner. Indoor track is not as big now as it was back then, but 40, 50 years ago, indoor track was really exciting. So I was a great indoor runner. I ran the 600-yard run indoors. I was 13th in the country out of high school. I did pretty well, and got to Dartmouth and ran the 600 indoors, indoor track, and ran the 400, 440 in outdoor track. Ultimately, I switched and moved up to the 800 meters, and I did well in the 600. I was Ivy League champion several times, and we had a great 1 mile relay team at Dartmouth, and we were All-Americans twice. And in 1976, beating the likes of UCLA and USC, 4 black guys from an Ivy League college, non-athletic scholarship, running against the scholarship schools and beating them and making the All-American team. That was quite a feat.
Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. And were there any experiences at Dartmouth that you think back on and they formed who you are today?
Yeah, a couple things. It was clear that if you were black in Hanover, New Hampshire in 1972, you were a rare commodity. I think there were 25 black students in my class. I think there were only 100 total through the 4 classes. So it was different. It was tough to get used to. I was glad that I was actually living in a society dorm. It's called the Afro-Am, because that's where there were all black students there. And after dealing with the challenges of, 1, being at an Ivy League school, 2, being in a totally white environment all day long, every day, 2.5 to 3 hours from home, being able to go to the AM in the evening to let my hair down and relax was probably what saved me. I lived there in the AM for 2 years, and it really helped to ease my mind because I could be amongst people that I could relate to, who were all going through the same experiences, coming from the cities, up here in Hanover, New Hampshire, with all these white folks, like, what's going on? How am I going to survive this? The academics are tough. So I remember that. That was something. The other experience, there's 2 other experiences I'll never forget. I took freshman English, and I had this professor, notorious, John Lincoln. John Lincoln was a tremendous English literature professor and writing. He had the prototypical Ivy League offer, smoked a pipe, and he had the Basset Hound and the cardigan sweaters, and whole 9 yards. And after my first paper, he said, "Hey, look, you're going to write a paper a week, and I stop grading your paper after your 5th error, and you fail." So I wrote my first paper, and he drew a red line after the 2nd sentence, big F at the top. Oh my God! And after the 2nd sentence, I was scared. So I went to his office, and I said, "What is this?" He said, "Well, what it is, Mr. Nichols, is that you can't write. That's what it is." I said, "But I did well in high school." He said, "Yeah, well, this is not good enough for here. And in order for you to make it here at Dartmouth, you have to be able to write. So you have serious problems. Syntax with everything. Syntax. What is that? A syntax? That's something in Nevada? No." Yeah, what is he talking about? I said, "Well, how am I going to make it?" He said, if you're willing to do the work, I'm willing to work with you. He said, it means coming to my office at 4 o'clock every day. Between 4 and 6 every day, I will teach you how to write. And by the time this quarter is up, you'll be a great writer." So I went every day and ended up doing well and never got less than a B+ at Dartmouth in anything I ever wrote. I became a senior fellow in my senior year. And a few years later, 10 years later, when I became a published writer, I sent him my first article and thanked him for teaching me how to write. So I'll never forget that experience. And then the next experience was in my first history class with Professor Danielle, Jerry Danielle.
He was around when I was there.
Yeah, exactly. And after the first class, he said, he picked us all out and said, "Can you guys hang back after class? I want to talk to you." Sure. So he said, "Now, you're all black students, and I know you can't write."
Oh, my goodness.
What kind of crap is that? We're black and you know we can't write? Man, get out of here. I got up and walked out of there. Who's this guy? We're all black students. I know you can't write. Didn't sit well with me at all. Never forgot it. And never forgave him for that either. Never did. So,
yeah,
experience. Yeah.
It's a long way from peering out that window to watch the troopers converge on that grocery store, isn't it? For those who've never been to Hanover, it is not the inner city. It is the anti-inner city. And I know Cutter Hall. I know the spots obviously you're talking about, and those are great stories. So you progressed, you got your master's at Stanford, which I know was a fantastic experience, and we may come back to some of that because you've had some really interesting public policy experiences. And then you had some Olympic aspirations, if I recall correctly, leading up to the 80 Olympics. Talk a little bit about that and the ups and downs. I mean, that was, for those who are young listening to this, 1980 was, of course, the year the United States boycotted the Olympics because they were in Russia or the Soviet Union. Talk a little bit about that.
I made the U.S. team. Coincidentally, during my third year of law school, I went to the University of California, Hastings College of Law. I made the indoor team in 1982. And one of the biggest thrills in life is to represent the United States in track and field. I couldn't wait to get my USA uniform and put it on, look in the mirror, and feel pretty good about having satisfied a goal that I set for myself in 1972. And I made a team in 1982. And we got to travel to Milan, Italy. And ran in what is now the Indoor World Championships. I had decided that year that I was not going to concentrate on indoor track. I was going to concentrate on the outdoor season. So I wasn't doing any specific speed work at all in January. And there was a big meet always in San Francisco called the San Francisco Examiner Games. And the meet director, Jim Terrell, called me and said, "Rich, man, I need you to fill out the 600-meter field. I said, "But Jim, I'm really not training for the 600. I haven't done any speed work. No, man, I need you. I said, "Okay, I'll come and run it, but don't expect much." So I went and ran the third fastest time in the country, qualified for the national championships, which were the next week in New York City in Madison Square Garden. So I decided, hell, I qualified, I'm going to go. So I went, came in sixth, disappointed. The race was on a Friday night. I was disappointed. I got up the next morning in New York, took the first flight at 6:30 smoking back to San Francisco. And unbeknownst to me, I had made the team because the first three finishers were foreign nationals. So I was the third American. So the next day on a Sunday, I got a call on a Sunday morning waking me up from USA Track and Field telling me I made the team, that they were traveling the next day to Milan. So I met the team in New York City, got on a charter flight. It was the greatest. I was in heaven. It was the greatest thing ever. And when I got to Milan, I got my uniform, put it on. Fantastic, man. Fantastic feeling. That's my track story. I did make the team finally.
You've got a few track stories, but we'll get into those in a minute. But I hear a policy bent. I hear athletics. What possessed you to go to law school? Why law school?
Yeah, I had kind of decided. I worked in a law firm during the summer up at Dartmouth, and I hated it. I was like, who wants to do this? This is boring. It's terrible. So I kind of nixed that as an idea. Never going to do that. Then I went to graduate school, Stanford. I wanted to be a attendant of schools or a president of a university. I wanted to be in education. I wanted to teach. So I got into the graduate school of educational administration and policy analysis at Stanford. I got into Harvard's program, got into Stanford's program. Why did I go to Stanford? Well, because one, it was the best program in the world. And two, their acceptance letter was personalized to me. The acceptance letter from Harvard was on, remember mimeograph paper? Carbon paper, blueprint. So it was this mimeographed acceptance letter with my name handwritten on a line. What kind of BS is this? This is Harvard? Don't want it. Typical Harvard, right? Yeah. So I went to Stanford instead and got to my first year, qualified for the PhD program after my first year, and took a consulting job in East Palo Alto, which was then the black neighborhood. Palo Alto and East Palo Alto were literally separated by the freeway. Poor neighborhood, that terrible school system. And one of the problems they were having is that the rich areas around Palo Alto, Menlo Park, Atherton, they were part of the property tax base that financed East Palo Alto school systems. And the white folks that lived in those affluent areas were tired of financing the black school system because what are we getting for our dollars? We don't care about those black kids across the freeway. So they were annexing themselves from the property tax rolls. So they hired me as a consultant to come in and try to solve the problem. So I got in there and realized that, you know what, I'm not going to be able to solve this problem because ultimately a judge is going to make a decision about whether or not this school district is annexed from the property tax revenues coming from the affluent neighborhood. I'm not going to solve that problem. So what the hell am I going to get a doctorate in education for if I'm just going to be sitting here applying some policy created by some judge who doesn't know a damn thing about my business, which is education, implement this policy about which that judge knows nothing about. So maybe I need to be a lawyer. That's when I started thinking about being a lawyer. And I decided to take a break. My advisor said, "Hey, look, man, you're like 21 years old and you're a candidate for the PhD. You need to go out and get some real world experience." So I applied to the California State Senate Fellowship Program. So I was interested in politics, policy. And it was a pretty competitive program to get into, and I got in, which meant I got to go to Sacramento for a year. And I worked for a great state senator from California, Nick Petras from Oakland, real good guy. And I got in, and one of the big things we were working on was this thing called Prop 13. We were trying to avoid Prop 13. Prop 13 is a proposition, a referendum that was going to be on the California ballot, which basically cut property taxes down to like nothing and deferred property tax revenues away from school systems and school districts. Mm-hmm. Senator Petras on an alternate piece of legislation that lost by one vote, didn't get passed. So Prop 13 was at the ballot that November, got passed, and California's public education system went down the toilet within 4 years, and it's still one of the worst public school systems in the country because of Prop 13. Prop 13 was what, 43 years ago, 1978. Just terrible. But when I got to Sacramento, I got to see the power of legislation. I got to see the power of the law. I got to see and was involved in writing legislation where one word or two was going to have a definite impact on people. So I thought, I'm going to go to law school, not to practice law, but to be able to be in a position where I can affect policy that's going to affect public and private education. So I applied to two places, Stanford and Hastings, University of California, Hastings. And I wanted to combine my degrees at Stanford, but they wouldn't let me. So I said, screw you, I'll just go to Hastings. So I did, with no intentions of practicing law at all. So that's how I ended up in law school.
That's fantastic. That's great.
But I didn't think it was so fantastic after I got to law school. Law school was a bear. But
yeah, no, law school is a bear. I mean, one of the reasons I want to have this conversation is you've had such an interesting path after becoming a lawyer. You know, you've worked in public policy. You worked with one of the great names in San Francisco, California politics, Willie Brown. Your path was not a, come out, go to Morrison Forster and, stay at a law firm forever. You had a different path. Talk a little bit about what you thought about as you started down your path, and then we'll go from there into some of the more sports law issues.
Well, I realized when I got out of law school that there were three things that I was interested in, probably in this order: sports, politics, and the law. And if I could find a way to combine all three, at some point I'd be in heaven. Senator Petras told me, he said, "Rich, the law degree gives you options. It gives you a lot of options that other people are not going to have. So just keep an open mind." He said practicing law might be the least of the things that you want to do, but you've got this great degree that you can do a lot with, but you have to keep an open mind, keep your options open. But sports, politics, and the law, that was my path. And but when I got out of Hastings, during my second year in law school, I was a legal assistant. I thought I wanted to be a prosecutor. Certified student legal assistant in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office in Oakland. And the Alameda County DA's office at the time was the best DA's office in California, probably still is. And so I was picked as one of 8 certified student legal assistants, got to work the summer there. If you got picked, you basically were guaranteed that you'd have a job as a prosecutor when you got out of law school. So I spent the summer there, actually had court trials and did suppression hearings and really loved it. And then graduated the next year, and Prop 13 kicked in, the budget cuts, and my job that I thought I was going to have was eliminated. So here I am, graduated from law school, everybody's got their jobs, I have nothing. So I called Senator Petras and I told him what happened. He said, well, I'm going to send you to a guy, he's got a law firm, his name is Bill Koblenz, Kane, McCabe, and Breyer. And they're a great place. So I go down. I had no idea what Koblenz, Kane, McCabe, and Breyer was. Well, what it was then and still is the preeminent, politically connected, powerful law firm in San Francisco. So I went to see Bill Koblenz. He said, if Nick Petras sent you here, then you got to be good. When do you want to start? Wow. Okay. So I got a job in this firm. So I got to see early on what it would be like to work in a law firm. It was a medium-sized firm, but I knew it wasn't for me. It just wasn't exciting enough. It wasn't fast-paced enough. we were working on some public policy issues that were mostly related to commercial real estate. I had no knowledge about and zero interest in at the time. So I said, this isn't for me really. And an opportunity came up in sports to become the legal editor at Runner's World magazine, which was down in Mountain View, California, which is where everything is now in Silicon Valley. And so I took that as an opportunity and an option. And within 6 months became the assisting, basically managed our coverage of the 1984 Olympic Games from LA. And it was quite an experience. And from that, I decided to start my own sports marketing company and went off and did that from starting in 1984. And in the middle of that, I was in San Francisco, loved San Francisco politics, wanted to work in politics, literally went to City Hall one day to inquire about volunteering with the Board of Supervisors, which is the city council. And the clerk of the Board of Supervisors said, go see Supervisor Kennedy, just got elected in her own right. She's looking for somebody just like you, and you might get a job. So I went down, knocked on her door. She was a matronly 56-year-old black woman who went to college late in life at age 51 and was an appointee of Dianne Feinstein's when Dianne was the mayor. Dianne appointed Supervisor Kennedy to the supervisor's seat. Then Kennedy, she ran in her own right. She said, I want somebody who can help me build my own persona. I don't want to be a Dianne Feinstein appointee. I want to be Willie Kennedy. That's who I want to be. Mm-hmm. I said, well, that's me. So she gave me the job on the spot. And that was the beginning of a tremendous experience in real-time San Francisco politics. Supervisor Kennedy gave me the opportunity to develop my own persona in San Francisco. I got to be close to Dianne Feinstein, who I all know is now as a U.S. Senator. I still have a relationship with her, and ultimately got to know Willie Brown very well. Willie Brown was the Speaker of the California Assembly for 18 years. He's the smartest person I've ever met in life. He was the king of politics, still was then, still is now. There isn't one president that's been elected in the last 40 or 50 years that hasn't consulted with Willie Brown at some point. I've been in his office when they called. And it was just the beginning of a great experience for me in policy and politics that I'm still kind of involved in.
What makes Willie Brown Willie Brown? What's the thing that you got to observe up close and personal from this great leader that gives you a sense for what was his secret sauce?
Authenticity. He was authentic. He said what he meant. He meant what he said. And he was just super smart. Just a brilliant man. And if he said he was going to do something, he did it, period. And you couldn't BS Willie. Don't ever try to BS Willie Brown because he'll hand you your butt. But he was authentic. He was straight up. You had to be honest with him, and he was just smart. Never saw the guy take a note, ever. Yep.
Take a note.
I still haven't. Never saw him take any notes. Never saw him read a speech, nothing. The guy was just brilliant. He's 85 years old now, still sharp as a tack.